In a world where the difference between the richest and the poorest person means the difference between being able to buy every single private jet in the world versus worrying whether your child is going to die from hunger tomorrow, in a world where the richest companies have more revenue than the GDP of entire countries, it is almost impossible not to suspect foul play. How can someone be so extremely rich and others so poor without someone having stolen something from someone else? And the truth is, to some extent, big business is stealing your money, but not the way you think. But first, let me ask you something. And your immediate answer to this question is likely to determine whether you believe a lot of the propaganda currently spread by mainstream media or your college professors. How do rich people become rich in a capitalist society? And now you know this is not a personal development video or a motivational video. I'm not here to tell you how to get rich quick. Instead, in this video, I'm going to shatter just a few of the presumptions about capitalism that pretty much everyone, and especially the people who want to stay in power, have tried to convince you of. Still, in this video, I am going to give you the #1 principle for becoming wealthy in a capitalist society. And afterwards, we're going to talk just a little bit about why anyone would have you think otherwise. Alright, let's go. First, I have to hammer down that when I say capitalist society, I do mean a free market capitalist society. In other words, an economic system in which prices for goods and services are determined by open competition in a free market with minimal government intervention, where private individuals own the means of production and operate for profit. And before we can get to the #1 principle for getting rich in a capitalist society, we have to first recognize that there are essentially only two ways to acquire wealth in any type of society, whether it's capitalist or not, through voluntary means or involuntary means. In other words, apart from pure luck, winning the lottery or inheriting a lot of money from your filthy rich parents, you can either, one, produce something that is so valuable to other people that they are willing to pay you money for it. This can be a product, it can be your own service, it can be directly through your own labor or indirectly by investing in other people's products and services. And the second one, #2, is to steal other people's money. Put a gun to their head and take their wealth away from them. That's it. These two are essentially the only two ways of making money in any society. Now, you might indeed take to the streets and start looting and robbing other people of their wealth. You might engage in acts of destruction. You might indeed steal your neighbor's car. But in most societies, that wouldn't be considered a legitimate thing to do, and in most countries, you would go to jail for doing that. In fact, the only entity that can legitimately steal other people's money is, of course, the state. It is lawful for the state to take your money using force because, lo and behold, the state makes the laws to begin with. And these laws are considered legitimate because the state holds the monopoly for violence over its given territory, and since no other entity can challenge that monopoly, the state is able to violently, and in many scenarios efficiently, protect any law it passes. And by the way, this principle is essentially true for both autocracies as well as democracies. Now, in a completely free market capitalist society, the degree to which the state engages in coercion is minimized. This is inherent to the system. People are free to spend their resources and free to live their lives the way they want, because those resources are not confiscated by other people, and because it is both lawfully given and a social consensus that other people, including state actors, cannot tyrannize you. And this is also the reason, as the famous economist Milton Friedman used to say, that economic freedom and political freedom cannot truly be separated. And in a completely free market capitalist society, in other words, in a society where this principle is upheld, the primary and ideally only way to make money is to produce something that other people need and want. Something that other people will pay you for voluntarily. In such a society, we do not have the right to take other people's property away from them, just as little as we have the right to take other people's lives away from them. No matter what fancy arguments we might use to justify theft or to make the narrative fit in our own heads. But if this is the case, then how are big businesses stealing your money again? First and foremost, of course, because not a single society today, or ever for that matter, has ever abided by that principle. There has never on earth existed a truly free market capitalist society, though some countries during certain periods admittedly have been closer than others. Still, a society such as that of the US is a predominantly capitalist society, right? And of course, Apple is not showing up at your door with a gun forcing you to buy an iPhone. Neither are any other company. Still, there is a degree to which many of these companies are actually confiscating your wealth. How? Well, as I said before, the only entity in society that can legitimately use force is the state. What this means is that in a civilized society, the only chance we have if we legally want to steal other people's money is to collaborate with the state. And this happens all the time. Firms, industries lobby the government to get subsidies or to keep competitors out by imposing tariffs, quotas, by imposing regulation, which makes it more difficult for startups to enter the market. In fact, there is a quite solid basis for believing that most regulation happens for this reason. When the government imposes regulation, what happens in reality is that it raises the costs of running a business by adding to the bureaucratic burden of businesses. This again raises the barriers to entry, meaning that it becomes much more difficult for new disruptors and innovators to enter a market. And then the question is, of course, who does this benefit? The consumer? Absolutely not. More competition would of course result in the quality of products and services increasing and all the prices decreasing. In other words, a smaller degree of competition hurts the consumer. Obviously, the ones that truly benefit from this are the big businesses that are already in the market. Of course, there are always greatly sounding reasons for regulation. Usually it has something to do with protecting the consumer. Of course, the very same people whose tax money is being indirectly stolen by these industries. The exact same thing is of course the case with subsidies. You know, it takes a long time and a lot of effort to get people to buy your product voluntarily, especially when a bunch of other companies are also competing for the same customers. And especially when companies from all over the world, including places where they can produce stuff cheaper, participate in the competition as well. It's just hard, fucking hard. So while trying to sell their products, some companies try to cheat their way to the customer's money by essentially lobbying for subsidies from the government. And the reasons given are again, of course, always the same. Protect domestic industries, keep unemployment down, etc., etc. Anyone remember the financial crisis? A crisis which, not fully but partially, happened because of a completely insane degree of financial risk taken by a number of individuals and financial institutions. Now, the reasons for why the financial crisis happened to begin with was, as most other bad things that happen in society, a result of government failure, of state intervention. But I promise to do an entirely different video where I explain the reasons for the financial crisis. Now, during and after the crisis, do you remember what happened to these institutions? You know, the institutions that took upon them an insane amount of risk? Did all of them go bankrupt so that future generations of bankers and financial consumers could get into their heads that you and not everybody else have to bear the responsibility and consequences of the risk that you choose to take upon yourself? No, of course not. You know, a couple of them went bankrupt, and thank fucking God. But there were also some who ended up being bailed out by the government using taxpayer money. In other words, after having taken an enormous risk using the customer's money.
Dog shit.
After having created and sold financial products so complicated that nobody understood what the hell was going on, not the lawyers who put them together, not the bankers who sold or bought them, let alone the people whose money was being invested in these schemes. After having done all of that, suddenly having to face the consequences, they end up being rewarded by the government, who effectively forces the taxpayer to invest in these messed up institutions.
Paulson and Bernanke just left the White House. There's going to be a bailout.
All of which no true believer in free market capitalism would ever have supported. But no, sure. The fact that corrupt, inefficient, and overly risk-assuming firms and institutions keep existing, all the fault of free market capitalism, sure. To sum all of this up, the way that big business is really stealing your money is not through the workings of the free market. It is not by producing things or selling things in order to maximize profit or shareholder value. There is nothing inherently exploitative in making money in a free market system. And an economic system based on voluntary transactions is not a zero-sum game. And it is this misunderstanding that allows for millennials and Gen Zs to believe in the Marxist narrative. It is for this reason that while millions of young people today spend money on services and products they like, iPhones, electronics in general, means of transportation, clothes, and while buying these products, while choosing to voluntarily pay these companies money, they simultaneously believe that the maximization of profit is somehow an evil pursuit. The truth is, of course, that in a completely free market, if you don't want a specific company to make money, the solution is simple. Don't buy that company's products. You don't want Apple to make money? Fine, don't buy an iPhone. And one of the biggest problems with this misunderstanding is, of course, that it diverts attention away from the real issue. Namely, that many corporations do indeed steal your money. Many corporations do indeed contribute to the reduction of your individual freedom. But the way they do it is by taking advantage of the state's state's monopoly for violence, gaining access to the money of the taxpayer by using the state's ability to regulate, thereby keeping competitors out of the market. Something that ultimately allows the companies to inflate prices. And by using the state to save its own ass when crisis hits, or when the company has not been good enough to manage risk, or when it has administered resources inefficiently, all of which disrupts the market's natural ability to obliterate or at least punish those who do poorly in terms of providing value and rewarding those who do well. Big business is stealing your money, not because of the free market, but because of the disruption of the free market.